Echoes of Betrayal. Chapter 1: The Shot. My name is Jack Harrison, 34, and just 6 months ago, I was a man who understood happiness. 15 years in the SEALs, honorable discharge, private security work for a businessman with shadows in his past. All of it seemed inconsequential compared to having Sarah in my life. My wife. My anchor in a sea of chaos. Until that Thursday when I saw a criminal's gun pressed against her temple on national television. Then I couldn't have imagined that this was merely the opening act in a symphony of betrayal and misfortune that would drag me into depths from which I had no hope of emerging alive. The shooting range reeked of gunpowder that morning, a familiar scent, sharp, metallic, intimate. It had saturated my clothes for years. After retirement, I still came to the range every Thursday from 7 to 8:30 before work. Old habits cling to life with desperation, especially those that kept you breathing. I emptied the last magazine, exhaled, and set the pistol down. Not a single shot missed the center of the target. The imaginary adversaries died quickly and efficiently, no wasted movement. The SEALs taught us precisely this. Economy of motion, only what's necessary. You become almost mechanical. You wear the mask so often that, beneath it, your true face begins to fade. I removed my protective headphones and glasses when a bright light flashed to my left. Usually, I ignored the television hanging in the corner of the range, the endless chatter of news you can't change anyway. But today, a red emergency banner crawled across the screen, drawing my attention upward. Continues to develop at Seattle First National Bank, where armed suspects are holding multiple hostages. Preliminary reports indicate that one security guard has been seriously wounded. Police have surrounded the building. Seattle First, Sarah's bank. Time seemed to slow. I tasted the familiar metallic flavor flooding my mouth and felt cold spreading through my limbs. This was nothing but pure, undiluted fear. I knew fear. It had visited me many times. In Iraq, when our unit was caught in crossfire. In the Afghanistan mountains, when we lost navigation and wandered 3 days without water. But that fear was comprehensible. I knew what to do with it. This fear paralyzed because I was powerless to change anything. Sarah. We met 2 years ago, 6 months after my discharge. I was drifting aimlessly through civilian life, searching for a foothold. For 15 years, I had been nothing but a soldier. What was I now? Donovan, my future boss, had already offered me security work and I accepted. I knew nothing else. But the job hadn't started yet. I walked into the bank to open an account for my first paycheck and saw her, a quiet woman with sea blue eyes that seemed too old for her young face. "How can I help you?" she asked, and I knew I was lost. 6 months later, we married. Something about Sarah reminded me of myself. A hidden sorrow, a watchfulness. I never questioned her about her past. We all have our ghosts. I loved her because she never demanded I talk about the war, about the nightmares that sometimes visited in darkness. She would simply hold me and remain silent. And now she was there in a besieged bank, with armed criminals. I knew this sensation, like falling into an abyss without a parachute. "Hey Jack, you okay?" called Jim, the range owner. "You're white as a sheet." "I need to go." My voice sounded foreign, as if coming through a speaker. "My wife, she works at that bank." Without waiting for a response, I rushed to the exit, pulling my phone from my pocket. Donovan answered on the second ring. "Boss, I need to leave. Sarah's in trouble. Bank robbery, she's inside." "Your wife is a hostage." His voice sounded concerned. "Jesus Christ, Jack, forget about work. Go, keep me posted if you need any unofficial help." I didn't wait to hear what he was offering. My mind had already switched to mission mode. Obstacle, Sarah in danger. Objective, reach her. Available actions. First, assess the situation on site. I burst into the parking lot and jumped into my black Ford. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel, something that hadn't happened since my first combat mission. "Calm down," I commanded myself. "You won't help her if you lose your head." The city blurred past my window. I floored the accelerator, slipping through yellow lights, maneuvering between cars with machine-like precision. Inside me, a timer seemed to count down the minutes remaining before catastrophe. The engine's roar merged with the blood pounding in my ears. What would I tell the cops? How would I explain why I needed to be inside with her? That Sarah was my life. That if something happened to her, I would have nothing left. They wouldn't understand. To them, I'd just be another civilian getting in the way. But I had to find a way. The 15-minute drive felt eternal. I stopped the car 2 blocks from the bank. Police barricades prevented me from getting any closer, and ran, weaving between onlookers and journalists. The crime scene resembled a siege camp. Police vehicles with flashing lights, SWAT team members in tactical vests, cordons establishing a perimeter, and journalists, vultures with microphones, circling for a sensation. I had been at crime scenes both as victim and rescuer, but now I was neither. I was just a terrified husband fighting through the crowd. "Sir, you can't pass." A young officer extended his arm, stopping me at the barricade. "Please step back." "My wife is inside." I refused to retreat. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge, now." Something in my voice or gaze made him hesitate. "One moment," he reached for his radio. "Captain, there's a man here whose wife is among the hostages, insisting on speaking with you." An indistinct murmur answered. The young officer nodded. "Your name, sir?" "Jack Harrison." I glanced at the bank building. Classic gray stone facade, wide steps. I had been there dozens of times, meeting Sarah after work. Now it appeared foreign and menacing. Behind those walls was my wife, and I could do nothing. A minute later, a man in a tactical vest over civilian clothes approached me. Around 40, prematurely gray, with the steady gaze of someone accustomed to responsibility. "Captain Baker," he introduced himself. "You're the husband of one of the hostages." "Jack Harrison. My wife Sarah works as a teller. What's happening in there?" Baker led me away from the barricade, out of earshot. "Mr. Harrison, the situation is under control. We have 5 armed perpetrators, approximately 7 hostages, including your wife. We're negotiating." I surveyed the police positions. They had made a critical error. "Your north entrance position is vulnerable. If the perpetrators are well prepared, they could use that exit for a breakout." Baker raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You military?" "Was. 15 years with the SEALs," I met his gaze. "Which is precisely why I want to participate in the operation. I know what I'm doing." The captain pressed his lips together. "Listen, Mr. Harrison, I understand your concern, but we cannot allow civilians into the operation. It's against all protocols." "To hell with protocols." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Do you understand this isn't just a job for them? What's at stake for me? Sarah is my entire life." "All the more reason. You're emotionally involved. That's a recipe for disaster." Baker placed his hand on my shoulder. "I promise we'll do everything possible to ensure your wife walks out of there unharmed, but you'll have to wait here. This is non-negotiable." I could have insisted, could have forced him to listen, but there was no time, so I decided to change tactics. I pretended to acquiesce. "Fine," I nodded reluctantly, "but keep me informed." "Absolutely," Baker patted my back with relief. "Now please remain behind the cordon, or I'll have you detained." I stepped back, keeping my eyes fixed on the bank building. Inside, I boiled with helplessness and rage. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. They weren't seeing the full picture. I knew the tactics of gangs like this. They don't surrender. They either break out fighting or die taking maximum hostages with them. And Sarah, my Sarah with her sea blue eyes that always looked at me with such trust. Time crawled unbearably. The sun climbed higher, the heat became stifling, and the situation remained deadlocked. The negotiator spoke with the robbers by phone. Officers took positions. Baker threw suspicious glances at me occasionally, but I stood motionless like a sentry at his post. At some point, I noticed movement within the police cordon, people rushing about, communicating urgently. I tensed, trying to overhear radio communications. Then a shot rang out, muffled but distinct, even through the bank's thick walls. The crowd gasped. I lunged forward, but police had already formed an impenetrable barrier. Baker sprinted past me, pulling on a bulletproof vest. "What happened?" I shouted after him. He froze momentarily, his face ashen with tension. "They killed a hostage," demonstrating they're serious. Cold sweat broke over me. "Sarah, God, not her, please, not her." "Who?" My voice broke to a rasp. "The guard," Baker replied. "The women are still safe." He disappeared into the crowd of officers, and a minute later, I saw a SWAT team assemble before the building. An assault. One way or another, it would end now. I assessed their preparation with a professional eye, good equipment, but their movements betrayed nervousness. Not elite. Regular police SWAT, accustomed to dealing with domestic crimes, not militarized gangs. Their flank position is exposed. They're not covering each other, too focused on the main entrance, I noted mentally. If I were commanding this operation, I would never. A deafening explosion sounded, a flashbang detonating. Then came automatic gunfire. The crowd behind the barricade shrank back, but I moved forward, ignoring police shouts. I had to see what was happening. From the bank's main entrance, they were carrying wounded officers. One, then a second, then a third. Emergency medics rushed to attend them. Baker, clutching a bloody shoulder, shouted something into his radio. I jumped to him, no longer caring if I was detained. "What happened? Where are the hostages? Where's Sarah?" Baker, pale with pain and fury, spoke through gritted teeth. "We neutralized 3 robbers. 2 ringleaders have barricaded themselves in the manager's office with 1 hostage. They released the others, your wife," he faltered. "Your wife is still in there." I felt my legs weaken. Sarah, she remained alone with 2 armed criminals. "What are their demands?" My voice sounded unnaturally calm. "An armored vehicle, cash transport for escape, clear passage to the Mexican border. And your wife as their insurance policy." Baker winced as a medic began treating his wound. "They gave us an hour. After that," he didn't finish. "You agreed." "We have no choice. Heavy reinforcements won't arrive for 5 hours from the neighboring state. We have 3 wounded, 1 critical. We don't have the manpower for another assault. I can't risk more casualties. We're preparing the transport." I walked away, thoughts whirling in my head. They would release Sarah once they felt safe, or kill her to eliminate a witness. Everything happening seemed unreal, like a nightmare. I stared at the bank building, and a plan was already forming in my mind. Insane, desperate, but the only one possible. 6 months ago, when Donovan bought a stake in this bank, I conducted a security audit of the building. I knew the location of all entrances and exits, technical rooms, ventilation shafts. I knew that from the adjacent building, one could access the bank's service corridors through an underground tunnel built back in the 60s. That's precisely why Donovan hired me, to identify vulnerabilities. I had to study the building plans thoroughly, and now that knowledge might save Sarah's life. I needed to act while police prepared the armored vehicle transfer, while everyone focused on negotiations. I had to save my wife. Slipping away from the cordon, I walked briskly to my car. Opening the trunk, I retrieved a gym bag containing remnants of my former life. A Glock 19 pistol I hadn't surrendered after discharge, 2 flashbangs, and a small C4 charge left over from training I had conducted for private military contractors. Not entirely legal, but my military habits proved stronger than the voice of reason. Zipping the bag, I circled the block and approached the 3-story office building adjoining the bank. A security guard stood at the reception desk in the lobby. I walked past, nodding like someone who definitely knew where he was going. "Hey, sir," he called after me. "Where are you headed?" "To Morgan, office 312, I answered without slowing. "Emergency call, network problem." I invented the name on the spot, but confidence did its job. The guard nodded and returned to the television broadcast covering the robbery. In the service corridor on the third floor, I found what I was looking for, an inconspicuous door labeled Technical Room. Behind it was a descent to the basement, and from there, a passage to the bank's technical areas. The door lock was primitive. After a few seconds manipulating it with a pick I always carried, another military habit, the door yielded. I slipped inside and began my descent. The basement areas were dusty and abandoned. Apparently, the security services of both buildings had long forgotten this passage existed. I moved silently, merging with the shadows as I had been taught. My body switched to combat mode, breathing steady, pulse slowed, senses heightened to extremes. 15 minutes later, I was in the bank's technical basement. Above came muffled voices, police remaining in the building. They weren't expecting an attack from within. From memory, I plotted a route to the manager's office. The best approach would be through the ventilation system, wide enough for someone of my build to squeeze through. Finding a ventilation grill, I carefully removed it and climbed inside. Moving through ventilation shafts was difficult, dust clogged my nose, metal dug painfully into my knees and elbows. But I pushed forward, ignoring the discomfort. Before my eyes was Sarah's face, frightened, defenseless. She had to believe I would come for her, always. After half an hour, I heard voices through a ventilation grill. Carefully approaching, I peered through the gap. The manager's office was expensively but tastelessly furnished, massive desk, leather chairs, paintings in heavy frames. In the center of the room, Sarah sat on a chair, her hands tied behind her back. She looked exhausted but held herself upright. My heart contracted with love and fear for her. Two masked men paced nearby. One held a phone, apparently negotiating with police. The second nervously watched the door, clutching an assault rifle. "They're stalling," said the one with the phone. His voice sounded muffled through the mask. "Maybe we should give them another reminder." He nodded toward Sarah. "Don't touch her," the second snapped. "She's our ticket out of here. If anything happens to her, those dogs will tear us to pieces." I watched their movements carefully, analyzing the situation. One, clearly the leader, cold-blooded, calculating. The second, nervous, jumpy, dangerous in his unpredictability. The attack strategy formed instantly. Create a diversion on the opposite side of the room, then attack, using the element of surprise. I carefully retreated from the grill and moved through the ventilation system around the office. Reaching the outer wall, I placed the C4 charge, just 60 grams, enough to create an opening but not collapse the building. Returning to my original position, I prepared a flashbang. The explosion wasn't very loud but powerful enough to create a human-sized hole in the wall. The room filled with smoke and dust. The bandits instinctively turned away, and I seized the moment, tossed the flashbang. A blinding flash and deafening bang paralyzed the criminals for several critical seconds. I burst into the room, pistol ready. The gunman with the rifle, blinded and disoriented, still presented a threat. Without hesitation, I fired twice into his chest. He fell, dropping his weapon. Was I imagining things, or was he wearing body armor? The second man, the leader, proved quicker. Through the smoke and dust, he fired in my direction. The bullet scorched my shoulder, but I barely felt the pain. Adrenaline blocked all sensations except absolute concentration on the objective. I lunged at him, knocking the pistol from his hand. We grappled in hand-to-hand combat. He was a strong man, well-trained. But I wasn't just fighting for my life, I was fighting for Sarah. Strike, block, counterstrike. We rolled across the floor, knocking over furniture, scattering papers. I felt his fingers trying to reach my eyes and intercepted his hand, twisting the wrist until it cracked. He howled in pain but continued fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal. At one point, he managed to pull a knife and nearly slashed my forearm, but I merely gritted my teeth. Catching his knife hand, I forcefully slammed his wrist against the floor. Once, twice. The knife clattered away. Using my full weight, I pinned him to the floor and wrapped my forearm around his neck, compressing the carotid artery. He rasped and writhed, but I maintained my grip. After several seconds, his body went limp. He lost consciousness. Breathing heavily, I stood up. The entire fight lasted less than a minute. The criminals were neutralized. My wife was finally safe. "Sarah," I rushed to her, drawing a knife to cut the ropes. "It's okay, I'm here, I came for you." Her eyes widened with terror mixed with something else I couldn't identify. "Jack," her voice was barely audible. "What have you done?" "I saved you." I cut the ropes and helped her stand. "Come on, we need to get out of here." She stepped back. Something in her movement alarmed me. The inner voice that had saved my life so many times on the battlefield screamed danger. "Sarah." She bent down and picked up the leader's pistol from the floor. Her hands trembled, but her grip was confident, not how someone holds a weapon for the first time. "I'm sorry for everything," she whispered, pointing the gun at my face. Time stopped. I looked into the eyes of the woman I loved more than life itself and saw anguish and determination there. The pistol in her hands didn't waver. She knew what she was doing. "Sarah," I took a step toward her, disbelieving what was happening. "What are you doing?" "It's me, Jack." "I know," her voice broke. "That's why I'm asking forgiveness." I could have lunged at her, could have knocked the weapon away. But something paralyzed me, not fear of death, but the impossibility of understanding why. Why would the woman who shared my bed, laughed at my jokes, held my hand during nightmares, why would she point a gun at me after I had just saved her life? "Sarah, put the weapon down, please." My voice sounded unusually gentle. "Whatever has happened, we'll face it together." Tears glistened in her eyes. I took another step, and at that moment she fired. The world flashed white, then red. I felt an impact as if someone had struck my head with a sledgehammer. My legs buckled and I collapsed to the floor. Strangely, there was no pain, only numbness and cold spreading through my body. I saw Sarah standing over me, still holding the pistol. Her face blurred, doubled, but I could distinguish deep, hopeless sorrow on it. Why, I wanted to ask, but my lips wouldn't obey. For what? The last thing I remembered before the world finally plunged into darkness. Her sea-blue eyes, so familiar yet belonging to a complete stranger. Darkness consumed me. Chapter 2: The Void. I've died many times. During SEAL training, they taught us how to endure torture, how to withstand pain that ordinary people cannot imagine. There, I first experienced what it means to be on the edge. Then came the hot zones. Afghanistan, where a sniper's bullet passed within millimeters of my carotid artery. Iraq, where an IED transformed our Humvee into a heap of debris, burying me under rubble and sand. But nothing compares to the sensation when the person to whom you've given your heart betrays you. Sarah's shot wasn't just an attempt to kill my body. It killed something deep within me, leaving a scorched emptiness where my soul once resided. Awakening was like ascending from great depths. Through dark water I slowly rose toward the surface, toward barely discernible light. Sounds reached me muffled, as if through cotton. The monotonous beeping of machines, the rustle of footsteps, indistinct voices. The sensation was familiar. I had lost consciousness before, but never for so long. When I finally managed to pry my eyelids open, everything around me seemed blurred, unreal. White ceiling, flickering indicators on medical equipment, the smell of antiseptics. My first thought was, I'm alive. My second, Sarah. I tried to turn my head, but my neck wouldn't obey. My body felt foreign, heavy, unwieldy. In my peripheral vision, I caught movement to the right. Someone in hospital attire approached the bed. "Mr. Harrison," a female voice, soft, unfamiliar. "Can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but only a hoarse rasp escaped my throat. Only now did I feel the tracheostomy tube in my throat. I attempted to raise my hand, unsuccessfully. "Don't worry, that's normal." The woman leaned closer, entering my field of vision. Dark hair, brown eyes, face tired but kind. "My name is Rachel, I'm your therapist. You've been unconscious for a long time, 6 months." 6 months. My brain refused to process this information, as if someone had stolen half a year of my life. What had happened to the world during this time? What had happened to I tried to pronounce my wife's name, but the tube interfered. Rachel, as if reading my thoughts, placed a small notepad and pencil beside me. "You can't speak because of the tracheostomy. It was necessary to maintain breathing. They'll remove it soon, but for now, you can write." With immense effort, I gripped the pencil with uncooperative fingers and scrawled a crooked Sarah. Rachel averted her gaze, and this movement told me more than any words could. "I'm so sorry," she paused. "The police believe she was abducted by the robbers. Nothing has been heard of her since that day." I closed my eyes to hide the storm rising within. She wasn't abducted. I remembered clearly. She stood before me, aimed the gun at me, her hand steady. "I'm sorry for everything." The last words I heard from her before the bullet pierced my skull. There was no abduction. Betrayal, pure and simple. A strange calmness enveloped me. Perhaps it was the medications, perhaps shock from the realization I had been in a coma for 6 months, or perhaps because somewhere deep inside I had always sensed Sarah was hiding something. Live, I painfully scrawled my next question. "Miraculously," Rachel smiled gently. "The bullet grazed you, missing vital brain areas, but the damage was serious. You underwent several surgeries." She noticed my eyelids growing heavy. "Don't tire yourself. You need more rest. I'll be nearby when you wake up." The last thing I saw before darkness engulfed me again were her attentive brown eyes. So unlike Sarah's blue pools, which now seemed like actual abysses, dragging me down to depths where death waited. The following days blurred into a hazy sequence of wakefulness and sleep. Doctors, nurses, tests, procedures. Rachel was the only constant in this chaos. She helped with basic exercises, talked to me, shared news. After a week, they removed the tracheostomy, and I could finally speak, though my throat hurt and my voice sounded hoarse and strange, like an old man's. The police didn't appear, though Rachel mentioned they periodically inquired about my condition. I was eager to speak with them, tell them what really happened, but something held me back. Some unclear anxiety. What if they didn't believe me? What if I myself began doubting what I saw? On the 10th day after regaining consciousness, Rachel informed me I had a visitor, Captain Baker. I nodded, preparing for a conversation that might clarify much. Baker entered the room and I barely recognized him. He seemed aged, gaunt. The shoulder wound he received during the bank assault apparently still troubled him. He slightly favored his left arm. "Glad to see you conscious, hero," he began, sitting beside the bed. "You damn near ruined our operation, but you saved your wife." I stared at him, disbelieving my ears. "Saved?" My voice rasped like sandpaper. "What happened after I lost consciousness?" Baker leaned back, his face assuming an official expression. "After the explosion and gunfire, we heard a shot from the office. We thought the bandits had killed your wife and rushed to assault. But when we broke in, we found only you, unconscious, with a bullet in your head. The robbers managed to escape with all the money through that very north exit you warned us to cover." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, clearly troubled by this mistake. "They took your wife hostage and disappeared. Crossed the Mexican border before we could organize pursuit. Mexican police are searching for them, but—" He spread his hands, and this gesture conveyed more than any words. I looked out the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. Like tears. My hands clutched the sheet with such force that my knuckles whitened. "She wasn't a hostage," I said evenly. "She was with them." Baker frowned. What do you mean? She shot me, Captain, deliberately. After I neutralized the robbers, she picked up the gun and shot me in the head. Baker looked at me with such shock that in another situation, it might have seemed comical. Jack, you're delirious. You suffered a serious head trauma. Your memory might be. He hesitated, searching for words, playing tricks on you. My memory is perfectly fine, I cut him off. I remember everything down to the smallest detail. Sarah wasn't a victim, but an accomplice. Baker scratched his chin. There's no evidence of that. Ballistic tests showed the bullet extracted from your head was fired from a pistol belonging to one of the robbers. She picked it up from the floor after I disarmed the bandit. Listen, Baker leaned forward. I understand you've been through hell, but don't let the trauma distort your memories. Your wife is a victim, not a criminal, and we're doing everything possible to find her. I looked at him, understanding the futility of further conversation. To him, Sarah was an innocent victim of circumstances. He didn't see her eyes as she pulled the trigger, didn't hear her voice pronouncing words of apology that should have been the last thing I ever heard. Ballistic tests, you say? I changed tactics. May I see the report? Of course, I'll send a copy. Baker seemed relieved by the change of subject. For now, rest and recover. When he left, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Something wasn't adding up. If police had burst in immediately after the shot, they would have caught Sarah with the gun in hand. But Baker claimed they found only me, unconscious. This meant some time had passed after the shot, enough for Sarah and the remaining robbers to escape, or enough to stage an abduction. I closed my eyes, trying to recall every detail of that day. What was I missing? What role did Sarah play in all this? And most importantly, why? My body recovered more slowly than I would have liked. After 6 months of immobility, my muscles had atrophied, my balance was disrupted, and my fine motor skills resembled a child attempting to control a marionette, awkward and unpredictable. The first time I tried to get out of bed ended in an embarrassing fall. Rachel caught me, preventing me from hitting the floor, but this humiliation, being so helpless, burned worse than napalm. Patience, Mr. Harrison, she said softly, helping me back to bed, step by step. Call me Jack, I grumbled. After spending months emptying my bedpan, formalities seem excessive. She smiled, and crow's feet appeared at the corners of her eyes. All right, Jack, but my advice stands. You can't rush recovery. I knew she was right, but accepting it was difficult. All my life, I had relied on my body, which never failed in the most extreme situations. Now it had transformed into a poorly controlled shell that refused to execute the simplest commands. Days turned into an endless sequence of therapeutic procedures. Massage, coordination recovery exercises, sessions with a speech therapist to improve speech that sometimes lapsed into incoherent mumbling. Each session began and ended with the same thing: wild, inhuman pain. I've never seen anyone recover so quickly from such trauma, Rachel remarked 3 weeks later, helping me with dumbbell exercises. I looked up, sweat drops trickling down my temples. I have a reason. I didn't need to explain what that reason was. Doctors and nurses delicately avoided the topic of Sarah, but I knew they understood. Their faces registered sympathy. Poor man, whose wife was kidnapped. If only they knew the truth. Rachel was the only one who seemed to genuinely care about me, not my story. She spent more time with me than her job required. Brought books, shared news, sometimes just sat beside me in comfortable silence while I performed exercises. One evening, when the therapy pain became unbearable, I couldn't contain myself and growled with anger and despair. What's the use if she's still? I didn't finish the sentence, but Rachel seemed to understand. If she still betrayed you, she quietly completed the thought, openly addressing this topic for the first time. I looked at her with surprise. You believe me? Rachel shrugged, her brown eyes direct and honest. I don't know what really happened, but I see how you're fighting not just against physical injuries but something more, and it's not just about loss. I looked away, suddenly feeling the carefully constructed walls crumbling. Years in special forces taught me to hide weakness, to shut off emotions when they interfered. But now I was too vulnerable, too exhausted to continue pretending. You know what's worst? My voice sounded hoarse as if from the depths. Not the physical pain, but that I don't understand why. Why did she do it? Everything was perfect. Or did it only seem that way to me? Perhaps all this time I had been living with a ghost, an illusion of love. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and carefully placed her hand on mine. Sometimes the people we love turn out not to be who they appear. I looked at her for a long moment. Or who I didn't want to see them as, I said quietly. Perhaps there were signs I ignored. Life with constant threat of death teaches you to notice details. But what if I consciously didn't want to see them? Because Sarah was my salvation, my anchor in civilian life that sometimes seemed more foreign than the front lines. Rachel didn't answer, just sat beside me, and her presence was like a quiet harbor amid a storm. That night, for the first time since awakening from the coma, I allowed myself to mourn not so much the loss of Sarah, but the loss of the love I believed existed between us. 3 months after awakening, I was finally discharged from the hospital. I could walk independently, though I used a cane for balance. My speech had almost fully recovered, only occasionally when tired, words would stumble and tangle. The scar on my temple, where the bullet entered, was hidden by growing hair, but the left side of my face remained partially paralyzed, giving my smile a crooked, sinister appearance. Not that I smiled often. Returning to an empty house was one of the hardest trials. Rachel insisted on accompanying me, just in case. But we both knew the real reason. She feared that, left alone with the ghosts of the past, I would break. The house looked exactly as I had left it that fateful day. A mug of unfinished coffee on the kitchen table, Sarah's jacket carelessly thrown over a chair, the book she was reading with a bookmark in the middle, as if she had stepped out momentarily and would return any second. I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling like an alien accidentally entering someone else's museum. This life, no longer mine. It ended the moment Sarah pulled the trigger. "I'll make us some tea," Rachel said softly, heading for the kitchen. I nodded, then slowly moved to the bedroom. Our bedroom, Sarah's and mine. The bed was unmade. We both rushed out early that morning, she to work, I to the range. I touched her pillow, still retaining her scent. Or was that an illusion I wanted to believe? I laughed bitterly. Returning to the living room, I found Rachel with 2 steaming mugs. "Did you know you lose your sense of smell after severe traumatic brain injury?" I said, accepting the tea. "And then they return, but distorted. What once seemed pleasant may now cause nausea." Rachel looked at me with her calm brown eyes. "It's not just about smells, is it?" I looked away. She was beginning to understand me too well. The following days merged into monotonous routine. Rehabilitation exercises, rare walks, sleepless nights. Rachel came every day, cooked dinner, ensured I took my medication, kept me company. Sometimes we watched news or old movies. Sometimes we just sat in silence. One day Donovan called. Our conversation was brief and businesslike. "Good to hear your voice, Jack. How are you?" "Alive," I replied. "That's the main thing. Listen, I know you've been through hell, but when you're ready, the job is waiting for you. I need someone I can trust, and you, Jack, have twice proven your loyalty." I considered. Returning to work for Donovan meant returning to the life I led with Sarah, to daily encounters with people who would ask about her, express sympathy, say there's still hope. But on the other hand, it was better than sitting within 4 walls, replaying the same scenario in my head. Better than allowing the emptiness inside to grow. "I'll return," I said, but I need a little more time. As much as you need, Donovan responded. My door is always open for you. A week later, after a particularly difficult day when the headache became unbearable, Rachel helped me lie down. I held her hand when she was about to leave. Stay, I said, hardly believing my own words. She froze, looking at me with an inscrutable expression. Are you sure? Was I sure? No, I hadn't been sure of anything since Sarah shot me, but I knew I didn't want to remain alone in this empty house with its ghosts. Yes, I answered. Rachel stayed, first for one night, then another. I didn't feel that all-consuming emotion for her that I had for Sarah, but with her I felt calm, safe, and that was more important than anything else right now. Outwardly, my life began to stabilize. I returned to work for Donovan, first part-time, then full-time. Rachel effectively moved in with me, though we never discussed it. One day her toothbrush simply appeared in the bathroom cup, and in the closet, several of her dresses. But inside me gaped a void that nothing could fill. At night, I was haunted by dreams of Sarah. Sometimes she was, as I remembered her, gentle, with a soft smile and loving gaze. Sometimes I saw her with a gun pointed at my face. I would wake in cold sweat and Rachel would embrace me, asking no questions. At work I became, as Donovan put it, more efficient but colder. I performed my bodyguard duties with mechanical precision, not distracted by human relationships, like a machine. You've grown harder, Jack, Donovan noted one day. We sat in his office after another meeting with dubious partners. That's good for business, but are you okay? You won't do anything foolish. I shrugged, ignoring the question. Tomorrow's meeting is at 10:00. I'll be there an hour early to check the premises. Donovan looked at me with concern but didn't insist. He knew what happens to people who have endured what I had, knew that some wounds never fully heal. At home, I maintained an even better facade. Spent time with Rachel, prepared dinners, sometimes even joked. But it all felt as if it wasn't really me. As if I were observing myself from outside, playing the role of a man trying to return to normal life. Sometimes when Rachel was at work, I would sit in the bedroom with a box of photographs, examine them one by one, seeking answers in Sarah's smile and her gaze, trying to understand when the deception began. Was she ever sincere, even for a day? Or was it all a calculated lie from the start? One day, sorting through her things, I had finally decided to remove them from the closet. I found an old photograph tucked into a jacket pocket. It showed Sarah as a child, no more than 5 years old, with her parents and a boy who looked remarkably like her. On the back, an inscription in faded ink, "Last photo with Ethan." I sat on the bed examining the photograph. Ethan. Sarah never mentioned a brother. She rarely spoke about her childhood, her parents. When I asked, she evaded the question or changed the subject. What else was she hiding from me? This photograph became a starting point. I began gathering information about Sarah's past, about her parents, who she said lived in a retirement home somewhere in Michigan, about her childhood, of which I knew almost nothing. I was like someone assembling a puzzle, but half the pieces were missing. What happened to the boy in the photograph? Why had Sarah never spoken of him? And what did this have to do with what happened at the bank? Who was my wife, really? And why did she need to conceal her past? I didn't tell Rachel about my discoveries. I didn't want to involve her in this. She deserved better than being dragged into my obsession with the past. But the more I learned, the less I understood. Each answer generated a dozen new questions, and they all led to one: why did Sarah shoot me? Sunday morning began as usual. Rachel still slept, curled up on her side of the bed. I went for a run, 5 miles every morning, even if each step resonated with pain in my head. Returning, I showered and made coffee. My phone vibrated, signaling an incoming message. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see something from Donovan or another reminder about a doctor's appointment. Unknown number. International prefix Mexico. Text. I'm in danger, only you can save me from death. Puerto Sombra, Mexico. Sarah. The cup slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor, splashing coffee. I stood staring at the screen, unable to tear my gaze away. My heart pounded wildly. My first thought was, this must be someone's cruel joke. Someone playing with me, using Sarah's name. Perhaps the same people who conspired with her. My second thought, what if it's true? What if Sarah really is in danger? I sat at the kitchen table, clutching the phone so tightly the plastic creaked. I checked the number, indeed Mexican. Puerto Sombra, a small coastal town in Mexico. What was she doing there? And why ask for help from me specifically? The man she tried to kill. Did she know I survived? Images flashed through my mind. Sarah smiling at me over breakfast. Sarah laughing at my jokes. Sarah embracing me after a nightmare. And Sarah pointing a gun at me with an expression of infinite sorrow. I'm sorry for everything. Perhaps now was my chance to learn exactly what she was apologizing for. I heard footsteps. Rachel entered the kitchen, rubbing her eyes sleepily. You're up early, she said, then noticed the broken cup. What happened? I slipped the phone into my pocket, as if hiding evidence of a crime. Nothing, just clumsiness, I lied, beginning to collect the shards. Rachel helped me clean up, then started preparing breakfast. I watched her with a new sense of guilt. Guilt for what I was about to do. She was a good person, Rachel. Better than I deserved. She pulled me from darkness, restored me piece by piece, created a semblance of normal life. And now I was ready to destroy it all because of a message that could equally be a trap or a plea for help. Over breakfast, we talked about trivialities, her work, the leaking faucet in the bathroom that needed fixing, the movie we planned to watch that evening. Ordinary conversation of an ordinary couple, but in my head raged a storm. Hatred battled with love, distrust with hope. I looked at Rachel, so trusting, so devoted. She deserved better than being the shadow of a woman who betrayed me. Deserved a man who would love her completely, without reservations, without comparisons. And what did I deserve? Perhaps Sarah's bullet that nearly ended my life, or perhaps the truth, however bitter it might be. The decision came suddenly, crystal clear. I had to know, had to see Sarah and ask her personally, because otherwise this emptiness inside me would never be filled. When Rachel went to shower, I began packing for the journey. Passport, credit cards, cash, the pistol I kept in my safe, several changes of clothes. On the kitchen table I left a note. I need to leave, don't look for me, you deserve better. Brevity was cruelty, I understood that, but any explanation would only worsen the situation. What could I say? Sorry, but the wife who tried to kill me needs my help, and I'm leaving you for her. I quietly exited the house, not looking back. In my ears echoed Sarah's last words. I'm sorry for everything. Now it was my turn to say these words to Rachel, who deserved happiness but found herself bound to a man who couldn't let go of the ghosts of his past. I got into my car and drove to the airport, not knowing what awaited me in Mexico. A trap or salvation, lies or truth, an end or a new beginning. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to learn why the woman I loved more than life itself decided to end that life. Chapter 3: The Abyss. They say between love and hate lies but one step. The same principle applies to heroism and madness. Who am I now? A hero rushing to aid a woman in peril, or a madman plunging into an abyss for one who tried to kill him? They don't even appear as antonyms, these boundaries so blurred. As blurred as my entire existence in the space between who I was and who I've become after her betrayal. Half a world behind me, and I approach the heart of darkness to discover a truth that might destroy me completely. But I can no longer live without answers. Seattle International Airport terminal hummed like a disturbed beehive. Monday morning, rush hour. People in business suits, families with children, students with backpacks, each with their own route, their own story. My story led me to Mexico, and with each step I felt Rachel and that semblance of normal life we tried to build receding further behind. The short note left on the kitchen table now seemed monstrously cruel. Rachel deserved more. Not just explanations. She deserved happiness I couldn't give her. Not when Sarah's ghost still stood between us. I checked in for a flight to Mexico City. From there, I planned to reach the Pacific coast where Puerto Sombra lay. I had to leave my pistol at home. Impossible to carry a weapon across the border. But I intended to find a way to arm myself once there. While waiting for boarding, I went to a cafe for coffee, and there I first felt it, a sensation familiar from hot zone operations. Someone was watching me. I turned my head slightly, surveying the area from the corner of my eye. Nothing unusual, regular passengers engaged in their own affairs, but my instincts hadn't failed me for years, and I'd learned to trust them. Back to the wall, gaze sweeping the hall. A man in his mid-30s, wearing nondescript clothing, leafing through a magazine, but his eyes repeatedly rising to observe me. A second, older man, pretending to be occupied with his phone, but holding himself too tense for an ordinary passenger. Both Latino, not tourists returning home too vigilant, not businessmen, no briefcases, bodyguards, unlikely. They watched me but made no attempt to approach. Information about my departure could have reached interested parties by only two routes, either through Rachel or through the phone that received the message. The first was improbable. Rachel didn't yet know of my disappearance. The second meant the message was bait, and they were awaiting my reaction. I didn't need additional confirmation that I was getting involved in something dangerous. Now it became clear that someone sufficiently powerful was monitoring me, and my reaction to Sarah's message was exactly what they expected. The public address system announced the start of boarding for my flight. I pretended to stand to throw away my coffee cup, but instead quickly ducked into a corridor leading to the restrooms. From there, I observed the waiting area. One of the watchers followed me, the second remained in place, apparently covering the exit. A decision had to be made immediately. I knew if I boarded the flight to Mexico City, they would follow. And finding myself under surveillance in an unfamiliar country was not the best way to start an operation. A contingency plan had to be formulated on the fly. I quickly walked through the restroom, exited on the other side, and headed toward another gate where boarding had just begun for a flight to Los Angeles. From there, I could fly to San Diego, then cross the Mexican border by rental car. I had to purchase a ticket right at the gate, paying a premium. Glancing back one last moment before boarding, I noticed my pursuer. He peered from behind a column, frantically typing something on his phone. They knew I had spotted the surveillance. I didn't delude myself. This complicated the situation, but it also gave me an advantage. They had shown their cards first. The flight to Los Angeles was short. Sitting by the window, I tried to piece together the little I knew. The message could have been sent by Sarah herself, if she truly was in danger, or by those who controlled her, if she had voluntarily participated in the robbery, or by a third party using her name to lure me. In any case, I was flying toward danger, but to retreat now meant spending the rest of my life asking, why? Why did she do it? What compelled the woman I loved to raise a weapon against me? From Los Angeles, I flew to San Diego, then rented an inconspicuous sedan and crossed the Mexican border through Tijuana. A pre-purchased Mexican SIM card and cash allowed me to remain invisible to those who might track my movements through banking transactions. A night in a cheap roadside motel, then a long journey south along the Pacific coast. I chose secondary roads, avoiding highways with their surveillance cameras. The Mexican landscape rushed past my window, sun-scorched hills, fishing villages, impoverished towns, luxury resorts. A strange country, so beautiful and so dangerous, like Sarah. 2 days later, I reached Puerto Sombra. The setting sun painted the sky orange, transforming the Pacific Ocean into molten gold. The town appeared typical for this coast, a mixture of tourist infrastructure and impoverished outskirts, luxurious villas on hills and shanties on beaches, a surfer's paradise and a refuge for those wishing to disappear. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts, introducing myself as Thomas Garcia, an American writer seeking inspiration on the Mexican coast. The owner, a corpulent Mexican with a perpetually sweaty face, showed not the slightest interest, only verifying the bills weren't counterfeit. Entering the room, my first action was to check for bugs and hidden cameras. Military habits don't rust. Then I took out a map of the town, purchased en route, and circled the area where Sarah should be located if the message was genuine. This concluded my first day in Puerto Sombra. Ahead lay reconnaissance, planning, and, if I wasn't mistaken, a meeting with the woman who had once been the center of my world but now had become the most agonizing of enigmas. Morning began early. At 5:30 I was already running along the deserted beach, stretching muscles and acclimating to the local climate. The heavy humidity of the tropical coast settled on my skin along with the salty spray from breaking waves. Despite the early hour, it was hot. A piercing pain in my temple reminded me I was still recovering from traumatic brain injury. 6 months in a coma, no joke, yet I was pushing my body as in my best service years. But there was no choice. I had to be in peak physical condition for what lay ahead. After the run, I returned to the motel, showered, and set out to explore the town. Puerto Sombra by day looked entirely different, bright, noisy, full of life. Tourists in colorful shorts, street vendors, fishermen returning with the morning catch. I started simply, surveying the town, memorizing street layouts, planning escape routes, knotting surveillance cameras. I bought a cheap mobile phone at a local electronics shop, then purchased beach shorts, a Panama hat and sunglasses, standard tourist attire that helped me blend into the crowd. By evening, I headed to a beachfront bar, the perfect place to gather information. El Pescador, the fisherman, was exactly the type of establishment I sought, popular enough among locals for open talk, but not upscale enough to attract serious criminals. I took a place at the counter and ordered a Corona from an elderly bartender. After observing him for some time, I realized he was exactly who I needed. Men like him know everything happening in town. "First time in Puerto Sombra?" asked the bartender, noticing my studying gaze. "Yes," I smiled, assuming the role of an enthusiastic tourist. "Beautiful town, especially those villas on the hills, must have an amazing ocean view." The bartender grunted, wiping a glass. "If you have a few million to spare, senor, then yes, the view is magnificent." "Who lives there? Rich Americans?" "Various people." The bartender became slightly more reserved. "Businessmen, celebrities, foreigners." I nodded, taking a sip of beer. "I suppose locals rarely go there." "Only as servants," he smirked, "or bodyguards." He pronounced the last word with a special intonation, and I knew I was on the right track. "Bodyguards?" I asked with deliberate naivety. "Is it that dangerous here?" The bartender shrugged noncommittally and moved away to serve another customer. The conversation had clearly approached a dangerous line, but I wasn't about to retreat. I spent the next 2 days drifting between different bars and cafes, casually gathering information about those living on the hills. Gradually, a picture emerged. The most luxurious villas belonged to people from the Montoya cartel. No one spoke of this directly, but everyone knew. On the third day, fortune smiled on me. In El Pescador, I noticed an elderly fisherman sitting alone in a corner. His sun-weathered, wrinkled face and calloused hands told the story of a man who had spent his life at sea. But what caught my attention wasn't this, but how other patrons avoided him, with respect and a certain fear. I sat at his table with 2 glasses of tequila. "Mind if I brighten your evening, senor?" I asked in Spanish, which I had learned during my service. The old man looked at me with eyes clouded by alcohol, but in their depths I noticed a spark of wary intelligence. "Why not?" he shrugged. "Tequila is always welcome." I introduced myself as Thomas, a tourist from the States interested in fishing. He called himself Pedro. For some time we discussed the sea, fish, boats. I used knowledge gained during SEAL underwater operations to maintain the conversation. Gradually, as the tequila did its work, I steered the conversation in the direction I needed. "What about those villas on the eastern cliff?" I asked, as if in passing. "They look impressive." Pedro tensed, but after a pause answered, "That place isn't for the likes of us, senor. Important people live there." "I heard some American lives there," I continued, pouring the last of the tequila. The old man studied me carefully. "Why do you want to know?" I shrugged, playing at drunken candor. "Heard in the bar that some big businessman from the States is there. Thought maybe an acquaintance." Pedro snorted, not buying my explanation, but the tequila and prospect of getting more did their work. "El Gringo lives there, a white American, Montoya's right hand," he said quietly, leaning toward me. "And his sister, a beautiful American with blue eyes. They say she doesn't leave there, or isn't allowed to leave." My heart skipped a beat. Sarah, it had to be her, but sister. Sarah didn't have a brother, or did she? I remembered the photograph found among her belongings with a boy who remarkably resembled her. Last photo with Ethan. "What kind of sister?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Nobody knows for certain," Pedro shook his head. "I've only seen her from a distance when fishing in that bay. She's always with guards, always sad." He finished his tequila and gestured for more. I ordered a whole bottle, feeling I had struck gold. "And what about the villa?" I continued, "heavily guarded." Pedro laughed. "Like Fort Knox, senor. Cameras, guards, dogs. They say even anti-submarine sensors in the water. Why would they need those in a peaceful bay?" He shook his head. "And a minefield on the land approach. So they say." He was clearly exaggerating about the minefield, but the rest sounded plausible. I mentally calculated possible penetration routes. From land, too many guards. From the sea, possible if I chose the right time. "When do the guards change shifts?" I asked. Pedro suddenly turned serious. "Why do you want to know, senor?" He looked at me with a sober gaze. "Who are you really?" I gambled on intuition. "I'm someone who wants to save the blue-eyed woman," I said quietly. Pedro studied me for a long time, then nodded as if making a decision. "Guard changes at midnight and noon. During storms, the underwater sensors malfunction, too much interference. Dogs don't like the smell of fish. They get nervous, start barking without cause, and the guards stop paying attention." He stood swaying slightly. "Thanks for the drinks, senor. Hope not to see you again for your own sake." When he left, I remained sitting, pondering the information received. Now I had a plan. Dangerous, almost insane, but the only one possible. Weather forecasters promised a storm in 2 days, just enough time to prepare. The storm arrived as promised. Heavy clouds blanketed the sky, turning day to twilight. The ocean heaved with foamy waves, wind bent palms to the ground. Perfect conditions for what I had planned. Over 2 days, I acquired everything necessary. A wetsuit from local surfers, scuba gear from a dive shop, a knife, waterproof flashlight. Weapons proved harder to obtain, but I found a solution. An old Colt .38 revolver, purchased from a boatman who clearly supplemented his income with smuggling. Perhaps not the most reliable weapon, but in close quarters, 6 rounds could decide the outcome. By evening, the storm reached its peak. Wind howled between buildings, rain lashed so fiercely that nothing was visible 2 steps away. I left the motel, heading toward the northern part of the beach, from where I planned to begin my swim to the villa. The sea raged, huge waves crashing against the shore with a roar. Under normal conditions, I would never enter such water. But now it played to my advantage. The guards would surely relax, assuming no one would risk approaching the villa from the sea in such weather. I donned the wetsuit, attached the waterproof bag containing the revolver and spare clothes to my belt, checked the scuba gear. Due to my head injury, diving wouldn't normally be recommended, but what choice did I have? Entering the water was the most difficult part. Waves tossed me like a rag doll. Several times I thought I wouldn't make it, but finally, overcoming the surf zone, I dove underwater and switched on the flashlight. Underwater swimming during a storm, a special kind of madness. Water murky, visibility minimal, currents unpredictable. But I moved forward, navigating by compass, periodically surfacing to verify my position against shore landmarks. After 45 minutes, I reached the bay where the villa was located. From the sea, it looked like an impregnable fortress. High walls, terraces overhanging cliffs, a small private pier. I dove deeper, circling the cape to approach the pier from the leeward side. The air in the tank was running out, but I had calculated the reserve precisely. It should last until I reached shore. A private yacht rocked at the pier, moored to withstand the storm. Beside it, a small motorboat. On the pier, two dark figures of guards under a canopy. Their faces were indistinguishable, but from their relaxed posture I understood they weren't expecting trouble in such weather. I swam under the pier and surfaced on its far side, where a breakwater created a small area of relatively calm water. Carefully climbing ashore, I discarded the scuba gear and retrieved clothes and the revolver from the waterproof bag. Rain and wind created a perfect screen for my advance. I kept to the shadows, moving along the villa wall toward the main building. Somewhere there, behind these walls, Sarah should be, if she really was here, if the message wasn't a trap. Too many ifs, but it was too late to retreat. I neutralized the two guards on the pier silently, using techniques honed through years of training. I didn't kill them, just rendered them unconscious, binding them with their own belts. In jungles where I had served, killing came without hesitation. But now I didn't want to spill blood without absolute necessity. It would only complicate the escape. Approaching the main building, I heard it, a woman's scream, high-pitched, full of pain. My heart stopped momentarily. Sarah. I would recognize her voice among thousands. The same voice that had whispered words of love and which had pronounced, "I'm sorry for everything," before the bullet entered my skull. Forgetting caution, I rushed toward the sound. A glass terrace door was ajar. Apparently someone had stepped out to smoke, despite the weather. I slipped inside and found myself in a luxurious hall with panoramic windows. Everything looked like a drug-baron movie set, expensive furniture, paintings in heavy frames, golden statuettes. The scream repeated, now closer. I moved toward the sound, revolver at the ready. A corridor, another hall, stairs up. A door at the corridor's end. From behind it came voices, male, sharp and female, full of pain and anger. Without hesitation, I flung open the door. In a large room furnished as an office, I saw Sarah tied to a chair, blood on her face, and a man poised to strike her again. Without hesitation, I fired. The bullet hit his shoulder, and he flew back against the wall with a cry of pain. Sarah raised her head, her eyes widening with shock. "Jack," she screamed, "behind you." I began turning, but too late. Something heavy crashed into the back of my head, and the world exploded in bright flashes, then plunged into darkness. Consciousness returned slowly, painfully. A familiar sensation, waking with a battered head in an unknown place. During my years as a SEAL, this happened more than once. But now everything was different. I was alone, without support, in a foreign country. The first thing I felt was the cold of a concrete floor beneath my cheek, then a dull, pulsating pain in the back of my head. Slowly, without opening my eyes, I assessed my situation. Hands tied behind my back with rope, legs too, but not too tightly. Apparently, whoever tied me lacked sufficient experience. I opened my eyes slightly and saw a dimly lit space, some kind of basement or storeroom. Light penetrated through a tiny barred window near the ceiling. Opposite me, tied to a post, sat a woman. Sarah. Even in semi-darkness, with bruises on her face and tangled hair, she was beautiful. The same blue eyes that had looked at me with love. The same lips that had whispered tender words to me. Only now her gaze held fear and something else, deep, inescapable sorrow. "You came," she whispered, as if disbelieving her eyes. Why didn't you forget me after what I did?" I looked at her, not knowing how to answer. Indeed, why had I come? To save her, or to finally get answers to questions that had tormented me all these months? "I want to know why," my voice sounded hoarse. "Why did you shoot me, Sarah?" She began crying quietly, soundlessly. Tears left light tracks on her dirty face. "I didn't want to," she whispered. "I swear to you, I didn't want to. Ethan said the bullets in that gun would be rubber, that they would only immobilize you." "Ethan?" I interrupted, feeling something constrict inside, the name from the photograph. "Who is he?" Sarah raised her eyes to me, full of pain. "My twin brother. He found me a year ago and began blackmailing me." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Slowly, with pauses, Sarah began telling a story that seemed fictional, but given her condition, I understood. Every word was agonizing truth. Her real name was Sarah Green. She grew up on a farm near Detroit. When she was 3 years old, her twin brother Ethan, after an uncontrolled rage episode, attempted to burn down the house. The parents, unable to cope with his mental disorder, gave him up for adoption, telling Sarah her brother had died in an accident. Only at 16 did she learn the truth, found an old newspaper clipping about 15-year-old Ethan's escape from a juvenile psychiatric facility. After that, she ran away from home, changed her surname to Harrison, her mother's maiden name, and began a new life. "I thought I had left the past behind forever," Sarah continued. "And then, a year ago, he walked into my bank. I recognized him immediately. It was like looking into a mirror, only distorted. The same eyes, the same face shape, but something dead in his gaze." Ethan found her after many years of searching. He worked for the Mexican cartel, had become the right hand of drug lord Montoya for operations on American territory, and he had plans for his twin sister. At first, Sarah resisted, but Ethan showed her photographs of her parents, now living in a retirement home. "I found them too, those traitor elders. I can get to them any time," he said with a smile so similar to her own. For a whole year, she lived a double life. By day, an exemplary wife and bank employee. By night, an accomplice to the cartel, passing secret information about clients and bank security systems. Then Ethan announced it was time for the big game, the robbery. When he explained the plan, I went cold. Sarah's voice trembled. "I knew you worked near the bank, knew you would come for me if you heard about the robbery, and then Ethan would kill you." She tried to dissuade her brother, but he just laughed. "Your husband is ex-special forces, right? It'll be fun to see what he's capable of." When I burst into the bank, Ethan gave her a gun. "He said the bullets were rubber," her voice broke. "I was going to shoot you in the chest where the vest would be, but when you turned to me, I couldn't. My hand trembled and the bullet hit your head." I closed my eyes, trying to manage the storm of emotions. Her story sounded like a madman's ravings, or a truth too terrible to believe. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" My voice sounded hollow. "Why not go to the police?" "Ethan monitored my every move," Sarah shook her head. "He tapped my phone, and if I had gone to the police," she shuddered. "You don't know what he's capable of. He's a clinical psychopath, feels neither remorse nor empathy. To him, people are just tools. My parents would already be dead, and he couldn't care less about them." She looked directly into my eyes. I loved you, Jack. I swear, I loved you more than anything in the world. And that's precisely why I couldn't risk your life by telling the truth. I wanted to say I believed her, wanted to say I still loved her despite everything. But the words stuck in my throat. Too many lies, too much pain stood between us. How did you end up here? I asked instead. After the shot, Ethan took me to Mexico. Sarah lowered her head. At first, I thought you were dead. Only a month later, seeing news on television, did I learn you had survived and were in a coma. By then, I was already here at the villa, effectively a prisoner. She explained that Ethan kept her under constant surveillance. She was allowed walks on the villa grounds, but always with guards. She had no phone, no computer either. Her only connection to the outside world, a television with cable channels. When I learned you had come out of the coma, I began planning an escape, Sarah continued. I tried to flee several times, but unsuccessfully. And then, she hesitated, then Ethan decided to use you. Somehow he learned you had begun an investigation, and he devised a plan. The message in her name was sent from Ethan's phone. He knew I wouldn't be able to resist, that I would fly to Mexico despite the danger. Why does he need this? I asked, though I had already begun to guess. He wants to use you for an operation against a rival cartel. Sarah lowered her voice to a whisper. They'll force you to infiltrate a port controlled by their people and sabotage it. She leaned closer, as far as the ropes allowed. But it's a trap, Jack. He doesn't plan for you to return. It's a suicide mission, a one-way ticket. I nodded, unsurprised. Such use of professionals is a common tactic in the world of organized crime. Use and dispose. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Wouldn't it be better for you if I agreed and died? One less problem. Pain flashed in her eyes. Because I love you, Jack. Always have. Even when I held a gun pointed at you. She spoke sincerely. I saw it in her eyes, or wanted to see it. I have a plan, she whispered, but we need to be very careful. At that moment, the basement door swung open, and bright light pierced my eyes. Two men stood in the doorway. I squinted, trying to make out the newcomers. A tall man in an expensive light-colored suit, clearly the leader, and beside him, I felt a chill run down my spine. A young man whose face made me flinch. The same face shape, the same blue eyes as Sarah's, but cold, without the slightest trace of warmth. Finally glad to meet you, my sister's famous husband, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Voice so similar to Sarah's, but with a metallic note. Ethan Green in person. Even if Sarah hadn't told me about him, I would have immediately recognized their kinship. The resemblance was striking. Like Sarah, only distorted as in a funhouse mirror. The man beside him stepped forward, examining me with professional interest. I am Alejandro Montoya. He introduced himself in flawless English with a slight accent. I've heard about your abilities, Mr. Harrison. I remained silent, studying him. Montoya didn't look like the typical drug baron from films. No gold chains, diamond rings, or ostentatious luxury. An ordinary businessman in an expensive suit. Only his eyes betrayed him, cold, calculating predator's eyes. Not very talkative, are you? He observed with a smile. Well, let's get to business. I have an offer that I think will interest you. Meanwhile, Ethan approached Sarah and ran his hand through her hair, a gesture that might have seemed tender if not for Sarah's tense posture. She feared him. This was obvious. Jack Harrison, Montoya continued, former Navy SEAL, specialist in penetrating secured facilities. Your dossier is impressive. I finally spoke. Dossier. Oh, we have our sources in American law enforcement. Montoya waved his hand as if it were a trifle. Let's just say we made inquiries when we learned who our dear Sarah's husband was. He crouched beside me, meeting my gaze. I'm offering you a job, Mr. Harrison. A job requiring your unique skills. What job? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I need you to infiltrate a port controlled by a rival cartel and disable their security system. Montoya spoke in a businesslike tone, as if offering a regular business contract. Tomorrow a container with weapons arrives there. We want to intercept it, but without noise and unnecessary casualties. I looked at Sarah, who almost imperceptibly shook her head. Don't believe him, her gaze said. And if I refuse? I asked, though the answer was obvious. Ethan immediately reacted, pressed a pistol to Sarah's temple. Then my dear sister will join you in hell, he said with the same cold smile. I looked at Sarah, at the gun against her temple, and felt rage rising within. But I restrained myself. Showing emotions now would be a mistake. Fine, I said calmly. I agree, but I need guarantees that nothing will happen to Sarah. Montoya laughed. You're not in a position to demand guarantees, Mr. Harrison, but I'm a man of my word. Complete the mission and your wife goes free, and you with her. Fail and she dies, simple. He nodded to Ethan, who removed the pistol from Sarah's temple. She exhaled with relief. Ethan will explain the operation details, Montoya continued. Departure at dawn tomorrow. Until then, rest. You'll need your strength. They headed for the exit, but at the door Montoya turned back. And don't try to escape. My people are everywhere, and beyond the villa, Mexican police who receive generous donations from me. When the door closed, Sarah and I were left in semi-darkness. Silence fell, broken only by our breathing. It's a trap, Sarah whispered. The operation is planned so you won't return. I nodded, unsurprised. I know, but right now we have no choice but to play by their rules, at least outwardly. I began working inconspicuously on the ropes binding my wrists. Whoever tied me truly was inexperienced. The knots were already yielding. You had a plan, I reminded her. Sarah glanced at the door and lowered her voice to a barely audible whisper. Ethan trusts me with keys to his office, thinks I'm too intimidated to betray him, too broken to act independently. She shifted, and I heard a faint metallic sound. I have a key hidden in a seam of my clothing. In his office is a safe with documents and money, and a map of all the cartel's hideouts. I was impressed by her resourcefulness. Sarah had always seemed so fragile, so vulnerable, and now she demonstrated determination and courage I hadn't expected from her. Also among the guards is a man, Ramon, she continued, whispering. He secretly helps me. His family is also hostage to the cartel. He'll be your driver tomorrow. I considered her words. The plan was risky but feasible, if I could free myself from the ropes and reach Ethan's office. Jack, Sarah looked at me with desperation in her eyes. I know you don't trust me. I know you've already suffered betrayal in my name twice. I'm not asking forgiveness. What I did is unforgivable. But believe me now one more time or we'll both die. I gazed at her a long time, remembering everything we had experienced together, remembering the gun in her hand and her final words before the shot, and the strange feeling that hadn't left me since awakening from the coma, that behind all this lay something greater than simple betrayal. All right, I'll believe you one last time, I said finally, the last. In her eyes I saw hope and gratitude, and something else, the resolve of someone ready for anything. The night passed in tense waiting. By morning, I had completely freed myself from the ropes but remained in the same position to avoid arousing suspicion from guards who periodically checked the basement. Sarah explained her plan's details in whispers when she was sure we weren't being overheard. Ramon was to be our ally. His family, wife and son, were in the village of Santa Cruz, hidden in the local church. Ethan didn't know this. Ramon told only Sarah when he realized she was as much a prisoner as he was. The plan was simple. Ramon, as driver, would accompany me and several fighters to the port. On the way in the mountain serpentine, he would stage an accident. In the ensuing chaos, I would neutralize the guards, take from Ramon the villa keys, and a map of secret trails through the mountains. Then I would return to the villa, infiltrate Ethan's office, take the documents and money from the safe, free Sarah, and together we would disappear into the mountains. It's an insane plan, I acknowledged, but better than nothing. I've waited so long for a chance to escape, Sarah whispered, but I couldn't manage alone. I needed someone with your skills. I didn't tell her this could all be a multi-layered trap, that Ethan might deliberately have allowed her to develop this plan, knowing she would try to warn me. That Ramon could be a double agent. But what choice did I have? If I refused the operation, they would kill Sarah. If I agreed and went in directly, I would also die. The only chance was to follow her plan, however risky it might be. At dawn, they came for me, 4 armed fighters and Ethan personally. Sarah remained in the basement, bound and under guard. Time, Ethan smirked, watching as they lifted me to my feet. Hope you slept well. You have a busy day ahead. They led me to the villa's courtyard, where a black SUV with tinted windows already waited. Behind the wheel sat a thin Mexican with a nervous gaze, presumably Ramon. They issued me weapons, a Beretta pistol and several C4 charges with detonators. Ethan personally checked the equipment, clearly enjoying the situation. Don't try to escape, he warned. My people will watch your every move, and Sarah stays with me as guarantee of your cooperation. I didn't respond, just looked at him, memorizing every feature of his face. A face so similar to Sarah's, but distorted by something dark, evil. They loaded us into the vehicle, me in the back seat between 2 fighters, 2 more sat in front, beside Ramon. The villa gates opened, and we drove onto a winding mountain road. The day was clear, unlike yesterday's storm. Sunlight brightly illuminated the mountains and ocean visible in the distance. Such a beautiful landscape and such a grim mission. The car weaved along the serpentine. The fighters were silent, only occasionally exchanging brief phrases in Spanish. I observed Ramon in the rearview mirror. His eyes were tense, hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. You can do this, I mentally addressed him, for your family, for freedom. When the road rose particularly high above a precipice, Ramon met my gaze in the mirror. A barely perceptible nod, and he sharply turned the wheel. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The SUV veered off the road and rolled down the slope, tumbling and crumpling like a tin can. I was ready. At the moment of impact, I braced my feet against the floor and hands against the seat, positioning myself as best the space allowed. The world transformed into chaos of impacts, screeching metal and screams. Finally, the vehicle stopped, overturned onto its roof. I regained consciousness almost immediately, years of training showing their worth. The seatbelt saved me from serious injuries. The fighters weren't so lucky, unbuckled. They suffered severe trauma in the fall. Struggling out through a broken window, I saw Ramon. He hung by his seatbelt, face bloody but alive. "Help me," he rasped. I helped him exit the mangled vehicle. He was seriously injured, a deep cut on his forehead, possibly broken ribs, but his eyes remained clear. "My family is in the village of Santa Cruz in the church. Save them," he whispered, extracting a key ring and phone from his pocket. "Here's a map of all roads and paths, and the code for the villa's back entrance." I accepted the keys and phone from him. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I'll do everything possible." Ramon nodded and lost consciousness. I checked his pulse, weak but stable. Killing him would have been more merciful. The cartel doesn't forgive betrayal. But I couldn't do it. Instead, I placed him in the shade of a tree, out of sight from the road. Perhaps he would regain consciousness and manage to hide. The fighters didn't survive the crash. 2 died in the fall, 2 were unconscious with severe injuries. I collected their weapons, 2 M4 rifles, several magazines, a couple of knives, and a grenade. A good arsenal for my return to the villa. Ramon's phone vibrated in my hand, an incoming call from Ethan. I didn't answer, knowing they would soon discover my disappearance. I needed to hurry. Studying the map on Ramon's phone, I found a trail leading back to the villa through the mountains, a longer but safer route. I set off, knowing my time was limited. The trail wound among rocks and shrubs. The heat was unbearable, but I continued walking, thinking of Sarah, left at the villa, about what she had told me, about the photograph with the boy found among her belongings. It all formed a mosaic, distorted, frightening, but meaningful. And at the center of this mosaic stood the woman I loved and who betrayed me, or didn't betray. After several hours, I approached the rear of the villa, where the service entrance for staff was located. The upper tier of the cliff on which the building stood was visible from here as if on a palm. I took out binoculars seized from one of the fighters and surveyed the territory. Security had been reinforced. Apparently, Ethan already knew about the operation's failure. But I had an advantage. They expected an attack from outside, not from within. The service entrance code provided by Ramon worked. I slipped into the servants' tunnel, moving silently. In the twilight gathering over the villa, I was practically invisible in my dark clothing. I neutralized the first guard silently, using a knife and chokehold technique. The second, just as quietly. They didn't even realize what was happening. I advanced toward the central part of the house, mentally forming a plan. First, Ethan's office. Then, the basement where they held Sarah. The key passed by Ramon fit the office door. Inside was empty, a luxurious room with panoramic windows, expensive furniture, and shelves filled with books that, I was certain, no one ever read. The safe was found behind a painting, a classic solution I expected from someone like Ethan. The safe key, hidden by Sarah in her clothing seam, I had extracted while still in the basement. Inside the safe, I discovered exactly what I sought: documents, money, several bundles of dollars and pesos, and most importantly, a flash drive with data on all cartel operations. This could become our ticket to freedom, leverage against Montoya and his people. I was about to close the safe when I heard footsteps outside the door. Quickly slipping into a niche behind the bookcase, I froze, holding my breath. The door opened and Ethan entered the office, alone. "I knew you would return," he said, not turning in my direction. His voice sounded almost dreamy. "She always believed in you, even after shooting you." I slowly emerged from hiding, keeping my hands visible, pistol in one, flash drive in the other. "Where is Sarah?" I asked. Ethan smirked, turning to face me. "Oh, my sister, she's safe for now." In his hand was also a pistol, but he wasn't hurrying to fire. He seemed to derive pleasure simply from speaking with me. "You know what's funny?" he continued, taking a step forward. "She always got everything: parental love, a normal life, and I received only rejection and pain." I didn't respond, assessing the distance between us and calculating attack options. "Did she tell you everything?" asked Ethan. "About how our dear parents got rid of me, how they put me in a psych ward and told her I died?" In his eyes flashed genuine pain, the first human emotion I had noticed in him. "Yes, she told me," I answered. "And you, of course, pitied her," he sneered contemptuously. "Poor, unfortunate Sarah, victim of circumstances. But do you know what she's been doing all this time here? How she helped us with information about bank clients? How with her help we laundered millions through shell accounts?" I remained silent. Whatever Sarah had done, I now knew she did it under duress to save her parents and me. "Come," Ethan suddenly said, gesturing with his pistol. "Since you're here, I want you to see something." I understood this could be a trap, but I didn't have much choice. If I started shooting, I would never leave the building alive. He forced me to move ahead, down the corridor, downstairs, into the villa's main hall. There, tied to a chair, sat Sarah, and beside her stood Montoya with a displeased expression. "Here's our fugitive," said the drug lord, seeing me. "Pity you chose the wrong path, American." I didn't answer, looking at Sarah. She was pale, but in her eyes I saw not fear but determination and hope. Montoya gave an order in Spanish, and 2 guards brought in a boy about 10 years old and a woman, presumably Ramon's family. The boy was crying, the woman pale with fear. "Every betrayal must be paid for, and now I will teach a lesson," said Montoya, drawing a pistol. Sarah cried out and I tensed, ready to spring, but Ethan unexpectedly intervened. "No, first, I want Sarah to know the whole truth." Montoya frowned with displeasure but holstered his pistol. Ethan approached his sister, leaned toward her, almost touching her face with his. "Do you know why they gave me away?" he asked in a whisper, but in the hall's silence every word was distinctly audible. "Because I was defective. Since childhood I had a mental disorder, inability to control anger, lack of empathy. Modern doctors call it psychopathy. Back then they simply said I was broken." He straightened, looking down at Sarah. "They chose you because you were normal, and disposed of me like garbage." Sarah wept, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't know, Ethan. I swear I thought you had died. They told me you died in an accident." Ethan laughed bitterly with a catch. "Accident? Yes, my whole life was that accident." I watched this scene, realizing something greater than family drama was unfolding. This was a moment of truth, when masks are torn away and true motives surface. "After they gave me up," Ethan continued, "I went through 7 foster homes, each worse than the last. In the final one, my foster father used me as a punching bag when drunk, and that happened every blessed day." His voice trembled with rage and pain. "When I turned 15, I ran away, lived on the street, stole to avoid starving, and then I met Montoya. He gave me a chance when no one else would." He turned to the drug lord with an expression resembling gratitude. Montoya nodded, accepting this tribute. "And all these years I searched for you, Sarah," Ethan again addressed his sister. "Searched for my other half, because only with you did I feel whole." In his words sounded a strange, unhealthy tenderness that sent chills down the spine. "When I finally found you, I thought you would be glad, that you would throw yourself into my arms, grateful I had returned from the dead. But you—" his face contorted with pain, "you recoiled from me, looked at me as if I were a monster." "You threatened to kill our parents," Sarah said quietly. "You forced me to participate in crimes. You destroyed my life." "I gave you a chance to be with me," Ethan shouted. "To be part of something greater than your small, ordinary life. You could have had everything, been a queen. Instead, you clung to your husband, to your bank job, as if it meant anything." He turned to me, and I saw in his eyes pure, undisguised hatred. "You stole her from me. She should have chosen me. I'm her brother, her flesh and blood, but she chose you." Montoya, apparently wearied by this scene, stepped forward. "Enough talk, we'll start with the boy." He raised his pistol, aiming it at the child. At that moment, I acted. My hand slipped to my pocket, where the detonator for the C4 charge lay, planted at the entrance to the villa's western wing on my way in. Pressing the button, I lunged toward Sarah. The explosion shook the building with such force that plaster showered from the ceiling, and chandeliers swung, threatening to fall. Montoya and his men instinctively turned toward the blast source, and in that moment I sprang forward. First priority, Sarah. I drew my knife and with one motion cut the ropes binding her to the chair, then pushed her aside, behind a massive column that could serve as cover. "Run!" I shouted, drawing my pistol and turning to face the adversaries. But there was nowhere to run. The guards had already recovered from the explosion's surprise and opened fire. Bullets whistled around, embedding in walls, furniture, shattering mirrors and crystal. I fired back, managing to hit one of them. He fell, clutching his stomach. The second managed to take cover behind a sofa. Montoya, who in the first seconds after the explosion appeared bewildered, quickly regained composure. He grabbed the boy, pressing a pistol to his temple. "Drop the weapon or the child dies," he shouted. I froze, calculating options. From my position, a shot at Montoya was impossible, too great a risk of hitting the boy. And I understood the drug lord wasn't bluffing. To him, a child's life meant no more than a fly's. At that moment I noticed movement to the left. Ethan, using the commotion, was approaching Sarah, knife at the ready. His face was a mask of fury and adoration simultaneously, a terrible, inhuman expression. "You always chose wrong, sister," he hissed. "But it ends today. We'll be together forever." I shifted my pistol toward him, but aiming was impossible. He constantly changed position, using Sarah as a living shield. "Ethan, please," Sarah begged. "Don't, this isn't you, it's your illness speaking." "Illness?" he laughed. "This isn't illness, Sarah, it's love. You wouldn't understand, you chose him," he nodded in my direction. "A man who isn't even of your blood, instead of me, your twin brother, your other half." The guards sheltering behind the sofa continued firing, preventing me from concentrating on Ethan. I changed position, rolling behind a heavy armchair, and managed one precise shot. The guard cried out and fell silent. Montoya, seeing he was without support, began backing toward the exit, still holding the boy as a shield. The woman, the child's mother, crawled after them on the floor, sobbing, begging for mercy. I could have pursued them, but Sarah was more important. She stood pressed against the wall, while Ethan slowly approached her, toying with his knife. "You won't shoot me, will you, Jack?" He didn't even turn around, knowing I was aiming at him. "You wouldn't dare, because I look so much like her. You see her face when you look at me, and your hand trembles, doesn't it?" He was right. Their resemblance was so absolute that even now, knowing he was a psychopath ready to kill Sarah, I couldn't force myself to pull the trigger, as if some part of me feared I was shooting her. I lowered the pistol and moved toward him, preparing for hand-to-hand combat. If I couldn't shoot, I could break his neck with my bare hands. Ethan, sensing my approach, suddenly whirled and lunged at me with the knife. I deflected, but the blade still grazed my shoulder, leaving a burning stripe of pain. We grappled in fierce combat. He was strong and fast, despite his dapper appearance. The knife flashed in his hand, targeting my throat, then stomach. I parried the blows, trying to seize his wrist, but he twisted away like a snake. At one point, I managed to execute a pain compliance technique, and the knife fell from his hand, clattering on the marble floor. But he immediately drew a pistol from behind his belt. I hadn't noticed it earlier, and aimed at my face. "Goodbye," he smirked. "Sorry to do this again." His finger tensed on the trigger. I knew I couldn't dodge in time. My entire life flashed before my eyes in an instant. Childhood, SEAL service, meeting Sarah, happy days in our home, her betrayal, the coma, the search for truth. And now, when I finally learned she hadn't betrayed me of her own will, I was to die at the hand of her twin brother. What irony! And then Sarah lunged forward with a cry. "No!" Her body shielded me at the very moment Ethan pulled the trigger. The shot thundered deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Sarah shuddered and slowly sank to the floor. I caught her. "Why?" was all I could whisper. "Why did you do that?" "Because I love you," her voice was weak, faltering. "Always have, even when I held a gun aimed at you. I couldn't let it happen again." Ethan stood frozen in horror, the pistol still pointed at us. "Sarah," he whispered, as if disbelieving his eyes. "No, no, you weren't supposed to. That wasn't meant for you." And in that moment, something inside me broke. All the rage, all the anger, all the pain of recent months erupted in one lightning movement. I lunged at Ethan, knocked the pistol from his hand, and delivered a crushing blow to his solar plexus. He doubled over, but I gave him no time to recover. My next strike caught his jaw, then his temple. He fell, and I continued beating him, feeling no pain in my own knuckles, not hearing him. Before me, I saw not a person, but the embodiment of all evil that had descended upon Sarah and me. At some point, he stopped resisting. His head lolled back lifelessly. He was dead. I released his body and returned to Sarah. She was breathing, but laboriously, with a rattle. Each breath seemed to cause her pain. "We need to leave," I said, lifting her in my arms. "Montoya will return with reinforcements." I saw the woman with the boy. They sat huddled together in a corner of the hall, too frightened to move. "Come with us," I told them. "It will be dangerous here soon." The woman nodded, lifted her son in her arms, and we headed for the exit. Somewhere deep in the villa, shouts and footsteps could already be heard, other guards rushing toward the sounds of explosion and gunfire. I led our small group through service corridors, trying to avoid open spaces. Sarah in my arms seemed so light, almost weightless, but I felt she was still alive. Had to be alive. We escaped the villa through the service exit and disappeared into the twilight, heading for mountain trails that should lead us to the border with the United States. The night in Mexican mountains is as dark as a well's bottom. If not for stars scattered across the sky with the generosity of a wasteful sower, we would have lost our way in the first hours. But I maintained course, navigating by constellations as taught in the seals, Polaris in the north, Orion in the east. Sarah in my arms breathed more and more shallowly. I had managed to stop the bleeding using a shirt as bandage material, but how much blood had she lost before that? The woman with the boy, Ramon's family, walked behind, trying to keep pace. The child no longer cried, only quietly whimpered into his mother's shoulder. We moved all night, stopping only for brief rests. At dawn, when the first rays of sun illuminated the rocky paths, I realized Sarah wouldn't survive another day's journey. Her face had whitened, lips turned blue, breathing became intermittent. "Jack," she whispered when I set her down in the shade of a large boulder. "I won't make it. Leave me here. Save the child and his mother." "Don't even think about it," I touched her forehead. Her skin was cold and clammy, a sure sign of shock. "We'll get out together, all of us." I examined her wound. The bullet had passed through her shoulder, dangerously close to her heart. But since she was still alive, major arteries must have been spared. I needed to keep her conscious, prevent her from slipping into shock. "Tell me about our future," I asked, changing the bandage to a fresh one torn from my jacket lining. "How do you see it, when all this is over?" She smiled weakly. "Our home, a small garden, maybe children." "Absolutely," I supported her fantasy. "A boy and a girl. They'll grow up together, protect each other, not like you and Ethan." She flinched at her brother's mention. "You know, sometimes I dreamed I had a brother," she whispered, "even before I learned the truth, as if deep inside I always knew he existed, that my other half was out there somewhere lost." I didn't know how to respond. The connection between twins, something beyond ordinary understanding. Even my SEAL training, which allowed me to survive the most extreme situations, gave me no tools for comprehending this aspect of human relationships. "You're not to blame," I said finally, "for what happened to him, for what he became. But what if I had found him earlier, if I had known and searched for him?" "Then we would never have met," I answered simply, "and I would never have known what true love is." Her eyes filled with tears. "After everything I did, you still love me." "I never stopped," I confessed. "Even when I hated you for your betrayal, even when I thought I could never forgive you, I still loved you. It drove me insane." She extended her hand, and I gripped her icy fingers. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "None of us gets what we deserve," I replied, "neither the good nor the bad." We continued our journey at sunrise. The path grew steeper, the air thinner. The woman with the boy showed remarkable resilience, but I could see their strength waning. My own endurance, honed through years of service, was also approaching its limit. The knife wound from Ethan had become inflamed. Every shoulder movement brought pain, and the bruises and cuts from the crash made themselves known. By noon, we reached a pass offering a view of the valley. In the distance gleamed the Rio Grande, the natural border between Mexico and the United States. "We're almost home," I told Sarah, who remained in a semi-conscious state. The descent proved no less challenging than the ascent. Rocks crumbled underfoot, creating treacherous traps. The woman fell once, scraping her knee, but rose and continued, firmly holding her son's hand. After midday, we heard a helicopter. It appeared from the direction of Montoya's villa and methodically searched the mountain trails. The drug lord's men were hunting us. We took shelter in a crevice between rocks, praying we wouldn't be spotted. The boy, frightened by the rotor blades thundering overhead, covered his ears and began whimpering softly. His mother pressed her palm over his mouth, holding him close. The helicopter circled above our position, then flew off in another direction. We waited half an hour before continuing our descent. By evening of the second day, we reached the river. On the other side lay America, freedom, safety. But between us and it stretched a turbulent, inhospitable water barrier. "How will we cross?" asked the woman in broken English. "My son cannot swim." I surveyed the riverbank, seeking possible crossing points. No boat or ford was visible. Sarah, who could no longer walk independently, leaned heavily against me. "We need to reach an official border crossing," I decided. "It's several miles downstream." "But there are guards," the woman objected. "They won't let us through without documents." I withdrew the flash drive taken from Ethan's safe. This contains information on all Montoya cartel operations, names of corrupt officials, drug transport routes, bank accounts. This is our ticket home. After several more hours walking along the river, we reached the border crossing. The small post with its American flag waving in the breeze had never seemed so beautiful to me. The Border Patrol officer met us with suspicion. Understandably, a group of ragged, bloodied people, one carrying a half-dead woman, didn't inspire much confidence. "I'm a U.S. citizen," I said, straightening as much as possible. "Jack Harrison, former Navy SEAL. This woman is my wife, Sarah Harrison, also a U.S. citizen. We've escaped from the Montoya cartel. I have evidence of their criminal activities." The border guard examined the flash drive I extended, then called for backup on his radio. Within minutes, 2 more officers arrived. "Mr. Harrison," said the senior officer, "we need to verify your identity, and your wife requires medical attention." "I understand," I nodded, "but first let us cross the border, please." After a brief conference, they agreed. We were escorted through the checkpoint, seated in a police vehicle, and driven to the nearest town on the American side. At the hospital, Sarah was immediately taken to surgery. Ramon's family, the woman and boy, were placed in a separate room under guard as important witnesses. I myself was patched up, the shoulder wound sutured, bruises and abrasions treated, antibiotics administered intravenously. Several hours later, DEA agents arrived. They questioned me at length about Montoya's villa, about Ethan, about the flash drive's contents. I told them everything, concealing nothing. Now that we were safe, there was no point in hiding the truth. 3 days later, when Sarah's condition improved and doctors permitted transport, we flew home. The DEA arranged a private plane. They were grateful for information that would allow them to strike a serious blow against the Montoya cartel. Returning to our city, my first priority was taking Sarah to the local hospital to continue treatment. Then I went home, to the house where Rachel might still be waiting. She was there, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, as if knowing I would return precisely today. Seeing me, she didn't rush to embrace me, didn't cry, just gave me a long, understanding look. "You found her," not a question but a statement. "Yes," I sat across from her, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. "Rachel, I need to explain." "No need," she shook her head. I always knew this was temporary, that you were never truly with me. Your heart always belonged to her. I didn't want to deceive you, I said quietly. Didn't want to use you to dull the pain, but that's exactly what happened. And I'm not asking forgiveness. What I did is unforgivable. I just want you to know you deserve better, much better than me. Rachel looked at me with her calm brown eyes, containing neither anger nor resentment, only deep, mature sadness. I know, she said finally, and I don't hold a grudge. I helped you when you needed help. You made me feel needed. Perhaps we both used each other, each in our own way. We sat a while longer in silence. Then she stood, gathered her belongings, the few things she had brought to my home during the months we were together, and left, simply and dignified, without scenes or reproaches. I stood at the window, watching her get into her car and drive away, taking with her that part of my life which seemed like a fog, the time between Sarah and Sarah. 2 weeks later, I brought my wife home from the hospital. She was still weak, but doctors said complete recovery was just a matter of time. I carried her in my arms, laid her on our bed. She looked around as if seeing the room for the first time. "Nothing has changed," she whispered. "Everything has changed," I contradicted. "We have changed." She took my hand. "What now?" she asked quietly. "How will we live after everything that's happened?" I sat beside her, looking into those blue eyes that had so long haunted me in nightmares and dreams. "Now we begin anew," I said, "day by day, step by step." My words contained no blind certainty that all would be well, no promises of eternal love and happiness, only a readiness to walk this path together, however difficult the road might be. "Together," Sarah whispered, squeezing my hand in response. And in this simple word, and how tightly she held on to me, I felt what had been missing all these months after her betrayal. Not forgiveness, that remained to be earned by us both. Not oblivion, some wounds never fully heal. But this was the beginning of something new, built on the ruins of the old. Redemption, earned through pain and sacrifice. A second chance that falls to few. I leaned down and kissed her, carefully, as if fearing she might disappear, dissolve like a mirage. But she was real as the pain in my heart, as real as the scar from her bullet on my temple, as real as the love that had survived despite everything. Outside, the sun was setting, bathing our home in warm, honey tones. Ahead lay the night, and beyond it, a new day, and we would meet it together, whatever it might bring.